let's get back to work. Okay. 288, the Green Revolution, Part C of your Unit 5 notes. It's fixing to get interesting. What is the Green Revolution? Good job, Sarah. Tell us about it. Can you start reading on that sentence before it on 288?
Yeah.
Thanks. This shift
in farming methods, known as the Green Revolution, involved new management techniques and mechanization, as well as the triad of fertilization, irrigation, and improved crop varieties. These changes increased food production dramatically, and farmers were able to feed many more people.
Okay, so that has a lot in it. Green Revolution happened back in the 1940s and into the 50s probably. It really got going. And the Green Revolution was an effort to increase productivity. I mean, you had World War II. A lot of people were coming back. A lot of people after World War II moved to cities for jobs, better jobs and wages. Prior to that point, most of Americans live where? Farms, good. Midwest. So most people lived on like family farms that produced their own food. They grew what they could. They sold some if they had it. And they lived kind of like self-sustaining lifestyles for the most part. But after that point, you had a lot of people move to cities. You had to increase. So if you have less people farming, you have to have more what?
Agriculture.
More production by the fewer people that are farming. So now we're at the point where really you only got about 1 or 2% of the population that farms, either growing enough food for their family or growing food for other people. So how do you produce massive amounts of food? Not only do we produce food for us, we produce food for other locations throughout the world, okay? So how do you go about doing that? One is mechanization. Mechanization means?
New machines.
Machines. If you turn over to 291, you'll notice here, machines in agriculture primarily refers to?
Irrigation.
Machines refer to irrigation?
No.
I mean, we don't live in Oregon. We didn't legalize hardcore drugs. Some of your responses. Machines mean what in agriculture? If you had a farm, you would use a tractor. Thank you, Jakayla. You don't need to know gangster rap to know that, do you? So, tractor, yes. So at the top of 291 here, we see a tractor. It looks like they're plowing a field, getting it ready to plant. Most big farms in the U.S. that produce most of our food, they're like 500 to 1,500 acre farms. These are huge, okay? So you need a lot of big equipment in order to plow the fields, to plant the fields, to fertilize the fields, to harvest the crops. Most things in large harvesting machines, what do we call those? 291 at the bottom. I think maybe, what do you have at 291 at the bottom? Is that picture green for y'all or is it like golden?
It's like green.
Does anybody got a golden one? I've got an older book.
It says monocropping.
Yeah, I know. It says the same thing, but the pictures are different. What is that green stuff in the picture?
Soybeans.
Soybeans. What are the 3 main crops we grow in America? You might know?
Rice.
Rice is not one of them. Good. Well, let's eliminate that. Now, if we were in Asia, that's probably number 1, but not over here.
Is corn?
Corn's probably number 1. Wheat and?
Beans.
Soybeans. Good. So these are our main crops. What do we use wheat for? Bread. Now, don't forget you had an extra credit opportunity making bread and a little research project to go along with that to discuss like the history of bread and why bread is so important to us. And I was really trying to tie that into this unit. So if you want to make bread while you're doing that, you can get that in by the Friday before the 9 weeks is up. I can't remember where I put that extra credit. It's like on the first day or two. I think it's
first day of this 9 weeks.
Yeah, it's on the first day or two of this 9 weeks. So that's a combine right there. So a combine has different like heads on the front of it, and basically it has a way of collecting the wheat or soybeans or corn or whatever And so it can harvest those. And you can see there is a lot of wheat out there. This isn't something you do by hand. Now, what are the problems with mechanization? So if you skip down to part C, the last part of it, mechanization increases profits and yields, but increases reliance on. If you're using machines, you have to have what? Money. Well, you gotta have a lot of money, sure. The government subsidizes a lot of that. That's not a bad answer, but what do the machines run off of?
Gas.
Most run off of fossil fuels, primarily diesel fuel. Some might use gas, but most use diesel fuel. So going forward, our increased use of fossil fuels on farming, we have to think about, like, what are you going to do in 50 years when oil runs out? You're not going to use diesel fuel anymore. What are you going to use? You're going to use, I mean, I don't foresee tractors running on batteries, not like a big one like this one, the combine. Now, I have seen a couple of battery operated, like smaller tractors advertised recently, but I just don't know that you would be able to run anything like you see here off a gas or a electric battery system. So what does productivity look like in the future? How do we make enough food for everybody? Maybe everybody in the future has their own little farm at home, or, you know, a garden at the home where they raise some of their own food. That's my hope and dream. Everybody have their own garden, raise their own produce. They can live healthier. They know what they're putting in their mouth. It doesn't have to be transported so far. Maybe they can have 2 or 3 chickens, or they can have a couple eggs each day. Eggs are delicious, high in protein. And so that's my hoop dream.
My great-grandma has lived to 103 because she eats her own produce out of her yard.
Yeah? More power to your grandma. She's 103.
She can't do it anymore, though.
Well, you should go over there and help her.
She's in a nursing home.
Never mind. Okay. You could have a garden. You could go over there and maybe they would let you make a garden outside the nursing home for all those old people to reminisce about their younger days. Okay, I got to move on. Let's see here. A shift in agricultural practices in order to increase productivity. So that's what the Green Revolution is. In India, this is kind of going on now, where you have and you see this in a lot of developing countries, where you have a really large population, and you've got to produce food for that massive population. So how do you go about doing that? Fertilizers, pesticide, a lot of mechanization, tractors, better management, crop varieties. And speaking of crop varieties, GMOs, what does that stand for?
Genetically modified organisms.
Are genetically modified organisms bad?
Yes.
Maybe, I don't know. I'm going to give you my personal opinion, and then you guys, y'all are getting old enough where you're almost adults. I'm sure in 10 years, probably a few of y'all have kids. You're going to have to make these decisions about what you think about genetically modified organisms. Now, I'm going to give you one that we consume regularly. We consume corn, soybeans, and wheat, or things that have those ingredients. Most of the corn, soybean, and wheat grown in the United States is Roundup Ready, meaning it has a gene that's been spliced into its genome that when you spray Roundup on a field, that it doesn't affect the corn, soybeans, or wheat. Now, what is Roundup and what's its purpose?
Keeps weeds out.
What does it do?
Kills them.
Kills them. Roundup kills pretty much any plant. You spray Roundup on a plant, it's going to kill it. You spray it on the field, it's going to kill everything in the field. So they've genetically modified those plants where you can go through and plant like a whole field, 1,000 acres of corn, and then go back through when the weeds start coming up, spray the whole field with Roundup, and it's going to kill every weed and leave the corn growing. Now, the problem is if you wind up with like the Cheerios box where you start having glyphosate, which is the generic name for Roundup, if you start having that show up in people's food, does it have long-term effects? Does it, there's lawsuits out in California where people are getting money for, because some places, I don't know, juries or judges have found that Roundup causes cancer, possibly, people that use it. So if we're consuming small amounts of it, what are the long-term impacts? So that's not really the GMO that's more the pesticide that's used. So in terms of if it's just got a gene spliced in, does that really negatively affect the plant? Does it affect it when you consume it? Maybe it just causes it to have more protein or better nutrition, vitamins and minerals and stuff. I don't personally think GMO in itself is bad. People have been breeding plants together thousands of years. Genetically modifying them is just a quicker way of doing that, where you're inserting genes. Now, when you talk about pesticide usage, though, you're using harmful chemicals to either herbicides, kill plants, or insecticides to kill insects. So you're using chemicals that can be very harmful to organisms. And then if that residue is left on those plants and you consume it, what's the impact on your body? Is it a carcinogen? Is it cause some type of birth defect? Those are things to consider. We're going to look at a common pesticide that's used a little bit later on when we get to water pollution. And this pesticide causes male frogs, even in the most minute amounts, causes male frogs to produce eggs. So, I mean, like, what are the ramifications if that's going on in our food and our water supply? How does it affect us? So these are things that you have to consider. That's why like when my wife was pregnant, she would primarily only eat organic foods. Organic means it didn't use pesticide. They're not using synthetic fertilizers. The main thing was the pesticides, though. What kind of chemicals are going on that food? What kind of chemicals are still on that food or in the skin of that food? And then how does that affect you when you consume it? Those are things that you'll have to consider, ladies, since we're all ladies in here. So, man, just like, you're not supposed to consume like 1 or 2 servings of tuna a month. Some doctors will recommend that you not consume any tuna. Well, I'm talking about when you're pregnant. So because of the mercury levels. So how do those chemicals affect you? And especially when you talk about pregnancy and development of kids, how does that impact you? Okay. Let's see. So we talked about pesticides. Pesticides kill things. We're going to get more in depth on those. Fertilizers. Fertilization. There's 2 types of fertilizers. There's synthetic, the one little pellets that you can spray around, like I think some people used out here in the garden. And then there's organic fertilizers, which is like chicken poop, cow poop, horse poop, whatever kind of poop that you can really use for compost and spread. When I was growing up, we used to spread chicken fertilizer. We had these big trucks would come and this guy would spread chicken poop all over our cow pasture to fertilize it. So there are positives of both of them. One is more renewable, but both of them also have their drawbacks. But in order to grow lots of food, you need a lot of nutrients for that food. In the video we're going to watch, I'm going to go ahead and go over this since we're talking about fertilizer. There's 2 streams of thought for growing plants. One, you feed the plants, meaning you fertilize the plants and the plants grow. The other stream of thought is you feed the soil and then the soil feeds the plant and the plant grows. So which one do you think is healthier? To throw a bunch of fertilizer out when you plant the plant, or to increase the health of the soil and then let that feed the plant?
Increase the health of the soil?
Yeah, and probably in terms of sustainability, that's a much more viable option, okay? So that's gonna come up in the video too, and y'all can talk about that under your soil section. 245, last one before we get started here, irrigation. Irrigation means to water your plants. This is not a big deal for us around here. Why?
Because it rains a lot.
Yeah, it rains a lot around here. We get about, 55 inches of rain each year. Out in California, where the video is that we're watching, they probably get 15 to 20 inches of rain. So significantly less than we get. So they're having to do a lot of irrigation. Most of their irrigation water comes from a well from groundwater. Yes. Good. So groundwater. What's the problem with using groundwater for your irrigation when you're growing stuff?
Might have other pesticides or whatever.
I mean, it could be tainted. That's usually not the biggest issue. if you're in an agricultural community and all of you are using the groundwater is really hard to detect like how much you're using. It's just like, let's say you and your favorite beau goes out to the soda fountain or the milkshake place, bring your milkshake to the yard and you're drinking it and you know, if you've bought a milkshake, Jacayla, and y'all are sharing it and he's drinking all of it, what are you gonna do? Okay, yeah, I mean, maybe, let's say you want, does anybody like milkshakes? I would want the milkshake. I mean, like, don't drink all my milkshake. Just at least give me half, right? Let's share it. What?
What you saying?
I wouldn't share.
You wouldn't share? So anyway, like, I mean, it's hard to share an underground drinking water or water for irrigation when you don't know how much is there. A lot of times people are just like, well, I'm going to use all I can. But I mean, you don't even know how much is depleting. It's like if you're both sitting there drinking, have 2 straws in a milkshake and you can't even see how much milkshake is left. And you're just both sitting there, well, they're over there they're drinking that milkshake awfully fast. I'm going to start drinking it faster. And you deplete your water source because water under the ground takes a long time to replenish. It's a lot easier to pull it out than it is for it to filter down through and fill it back up. So irrigation, you got to be careful. Now, let's talk about the Russians. On 245, the Aral Sea is the 4th largest lake in the world, or it once was. It's not anymore, because the Russians started diverting two of the rivers that ran into the Aral Sea, and they were diverting it for water usage. A lot of that went to irrigation. And what happened to the Aral Sea over that course of 40 years? It dried up significantly. Yeah, there's less water running in, so it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. You can have a big impact on a river system, a pond, a lake, or whatever if you're pulling out water much more quickly than is coming into it. So we have to be cognizant of that. In the Southwest, the Colorado River runs out of the Rockies, goes through Arizona, through the Grand Canyon, through Southern California, and down into Mexico. And it's actually on page 244 there. There's an aqueduct for the Colorado River. By the time the Colorado River gets to Mexico, especially in the drier times of year now, it's pretty much dry. There's very little water left. And most of that's due to too many people drinking out of the milkshake. That's right. So when you got too many people sucking out of that straw, there's not going to be much left. And normally where you'd have water coming down through Mexico wide open in the Baja Peninsula, there's not much left. So how does it affect the people that live down that way? Well, I guess nobody really thought about that, Isabella.